Hi, and welcome to the Dish on Divorce. I'm Jennifer Barkin. And today, my guest is Eva Sachs. And Eva, can you tell our listeners and viewers, what is it that you do?
So thanks, Jennifer, and so nice to be with you today. So I'm a certified financial planner, but I'm also a chartered divorce financial specialist, which means I deal with the financial issues in separation and divorce. And I'm also an active member of Collaborative Divorce Toronto, and I'm co-author of the book, When Harry Left Sally, Finding Your Way Through Grey Divorce.
I love the title of your book. So what's the difference between certified divorce planner as opposed to, I was on your website and I saw CDFA.
So the difference is when you're talking about the Chartered Financial Divorce Specialist. So that's a Canadian certification, where the other, the CFA, is an American certification. Essentially, it's more or less the same. The Chartered Financial Divorce Specialist has a bit more criteria of the kinds of people that they that have the kind of background they have to qualify and get the certification. But the work that we do essentially is the same.
I asked because I'm a CDFA, so I wanted to know the difference. So today we're going to talk about the gray divorce. And some people have heard the term the gray divorce, but not everybody. What does that mean? Well,
it doesn't mean, for those that are working with the people, that they've got the gray hair. It really means it's a label that's being used for people that are considering or going through divorce that have been in long-term marriages, so 25, 30 years and beyond.
So really the people could be any age, not necessarily, it doesn't mean your hair is gray.
But typically, we think of gray divorce as, certainly over 50, over 55 plus. So I've worked with gray divorce clients. I have one now that's 82. So it's, I guess, never too late.
82?
82. So it's never too late to say, that's it, I'm fed up, like, we're done.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I know a lot of people that have gotten divorced in their 40s or their 50s, even their 60s, but 82.
Yeah, I think
so. What are the differences after a long-term marriage? Are there different things that people have to consider?
I think in my experience and the research that I did when I was writing the book, people that are going through a gray divorce or deciding to divorce after a long-term marriage have been thinking about it for a long time. It's like getting to the edge of a cliff and looking over and going, no, I'm not going to jump yet. But sooner or later, they get to that edge and say, I have no choice. I have to jump. So for those couples that are at that stage, it really is, they've got more financial concerns with that have a little bit of legal implications to them than the opposite for somebody that's, let's say, younger and going through divorce and has children and so on. So their concerns are about retirement, certainly. Does this divorce or the thought of divorce change their retirement plans? Will they have to work longer? What will happen to the relationship they have with their adult children and potentially grandchildren? So they've got a lot of issues. Certainly health benefits is weighs heavily on them as well. What's going to happen with that? What are the opportunities or missed opportunities for income splitting that they had or would continue to have when they're married, as opposed to now being on their own? So the financial concerns are certainly a little bit greater or way more heavily on them than somebody who's younger.
I would think it's a lot scarier too. Not just the emotional of coming out of a very long-term relationship, a 30, 40-year-old marriage where times were different, maybe many, and I'm going to say women because it was mostly women, were home and didn't have that career. And, if you're starting over at 50 or at 60, it's not the same as I had, a starter marriage and it lasted 2 years and I'm 28 and retrain, get a job. So I would think it's a lot scarier for people.
Well, scarier, absolutely. Again, in researching the book, some of the reasons we found why gray divorce was on the uprise, right? Because if divorces have sort of leveled off, but the one growth area has been in gray divorce, having to do with, that age group is really the baby boomers. And so baby boomers have the tendency of thinking of me, what's in it for me. So I've raised the kids, I've put up with spouse and so on. Now this is really my time. So they've been thinking about that for a while, and so they think they deserve this. So that's part of that. Certainly the younger side of the gray divorce, a lot of women are primary breadwinners or have become primary breadwinners with the last downturn in the economy, where men in that age bracket maybe have lost their jobs, can't find another job, where women have either stayed in the workforce and now have had the opportunity to move forward and advance their careers. So they're sort of the stronger financially positioned person. And then the other thing which we found a little bit interesting was the advent of online dating. So the fear of being alone isn't as great. And so that was going to be one of the reasons why somebody wouldn't divorce at 60 or 65. That's been taken away, and they're much more open to the idea, not necessarily married, but they won't be alone. So
Interesting. A lot of people that I speak to that are a little bit older, I'm finding it's the men eventually want to remarry. And I'm finding that the women are saying, been there, done that. And I don't want to do anyone's laundry and cook anymore. I want to live my life for me.
I think so. Yeah, I don't disagree. So I think from that perspective, if somebody is, in their 60s and looking across the breakfast table and saying, oh my gosh, not that things are horrible, but I've had enough and I've got another good 30 years. Do I really want to spend it with you? I mean, the sense of women being a bit more independent. I mean, you see, groups of women going out for dinner, going to the theater. That social stigma of having a partner is no longer there, right? They're traveling, so if they've spent, the last couple of years, traveling alone or traveling with girlfriends, how much difference is it going to make in terms of their social life if they're not going to be on their own?
So, what sort of things should people really consider? They're older, they're going to get a divorce. Really, it's not about child support anymore and childcare. It's about money and being able. So, what are some things that people should do? Should they see somebody like you at the beginning, in the middle? When's a good time? And what can you do for them?
Well, I believe that it makes sense if we're talking about this being more of a financial issue and financial concern than legal. Starting with me is a good place to start. I certainly do help people with financial disclosure, which is the starting point for any kind of discussions that they may have. So whether just guiding them into what, how to do it and easier ways of doing it, to working with them. I have an online system that makes it easy and less painful. And obviously providing them with some education around, why are they asking for all these, whether it's pension statements or why they have to be valued, et cetera. So that's a good place to start with me. The other thing I think people have to realize is at this point in time, it's not worth fighting. And they haven't got the money, or they shouldn't be taking a lot of their hard-earned money that now has to fund their retirement on fighting courts and high legal costs. So they need to understand the different options that are available to them, whether it's mediation or collaborative divorce, to get them through this in a way that's going to make sense. And again, these gray divorcees, because they've been together for a long time, and even though they don't want to continue being together, they don't want to ignore the fact that they've had a partner, and they really do care. I find in most of my gray divorce clients, they really do care about the other spouse, right? They're not out to get them. It's just like, we can't do this anymore. So they need to pick a process, an environment that allows them to have these kinds of discussions and allows them to share information with regards to both of them, using sort of a phrase that I use all the time, that both will be okay. Right. And that can happen in mediation. That can happen certainly in collaborative divorce, much more so than, heavy duty, fight it out, a legal battle. Like they don't need that.
Well, sometimes in the heavy duty legal battle, what starts out to be not so bad, that one letter that comes from somebody's counsel just sets off and it just spirals and explodes.
Absolutely. I mean, we hear people saying all the time, we started off friendly and it turned ugly. They never say we turned ugly. So trying to understand what the it might be. It could be something that you're describing. It could be somebody in their social circle that starts to, feed them, information. I never liked her in the first place. You need to, you need to go after them. You need to protect yourself. That kind of language that can stir up ideas that people never really had to begin with.
I've seen a lot of that as well, where it starts out just pretty friendly and fine. You're not for me, I'm not for you, but let's go on with our lives and maybe we can be friends. It should be better. And then it just becomes a whole big blown up mess.
To be sure. And
So,
part of the work that I do as they start to have these discussions, so I create financial forecasts. As a CDFA, you know that's what we do. And so the financial forecasts for gray divorcees are much more realistic, because things aren't going to change that much. You know what you have in terms of investments. You have a pretty good sense of either if you're retired already or when you're going to retire. And so I take into account their income, their expenses, the assets and liabilities that they'll have, however they're deciding to settle, and run a forecast or paint a picture of what their future will look like. And for both of them, so they both can see over time, finding balance, right? So we're not looking at who's better off or not, but can we find balance for both of them over time? So their kids or their grandkids can say, yeah, we've gone to see them, and one isn't living so much better than the other. Right? And so there's
right.
not so much a fairness piece, but I like using the word, can we find balance for both of them? And I think that's what they're really looking for. And so financial forecasting can do that, because the numbers are what they are. If we're doing forecasts for somebody who's younger, there's so many other variables. I mean, your job's going to change completely. Your kids are going to be at different stages, so costs are going to be different. You don't know how much money you may have for putting money away for your retirement. So forecasting there is more variable, where in gray divorce, they're much more realistic.
One thing that I find that's interesting, and I know, but our viewers don't, and I'm going to let you speak about it, is in the law, there's this 50-50 notion that a 50-50 is equitable. Is it?
When you're talking about property, two things. Certainly, if they're working in mediation or collaborative, they don't necessarily have to agree to 50-50. We're seeing with a lot of these gray divorcees, for instance, if they have a home and let's say a second property, a cottage, and sometimes a cottage has a lot more meaning to them, right? It's the family compound, et cetera, et cetera. So they may have been thinking at that stage of perhaps downsizing anyways. So that decision is already there. I mean, challenging perhaps in terms of what they now have the option to buy, but they're certainly struggling with what to do with the cottage. And we're finding in a lot of situations creative ways of allowing them to keep the cottage together for a period of time, finding some ways of sharing it and sharing the finances and so on. So we can be creative in terms of the kinds of things that they might want to do. And it's not just straight 50-50. The same thing we can be doing when we look at pensions. For a lot of people, a pension is a huge asset. And so how creative can we be in terms of what are we going to do with this with this pension. So the more options we can show people, the goal is to allow them to make the most informed decision possible for them and for their spouse.
So Eva, sometimes in the gray divorce, the population, because there's not really an age, it might be just a long-term marriage. So those people fall in that category. But a lot of the baby boomers, for example, they may have stayed home, moms raising kids. And this is just how it was. And marriages are like businesses, they work like systems. So this is my role, this is your role, and it's understood. The end of the long-term marriage, she may be disadvantaged because they may not be that old, but as far as getting a new career, starting something, there's ageism, it's harder. So with that 50-50 notion, right, is that unfair?
Is it unfair? A good question. I mean, the other side of certainly a separation agreement in that particular situation, we're talking, you're referring to the property piece, but then we're also looking at the support piece. So some of that fairness may be balanced out, but what they may be entitled to support and what they may end up agreeing to. The thing I'll comment on that is certainly for a lot of those female clients who come in to see me and feel very intimidated and say, you know, how can I negotiate in a fair way? I know nothing about the family finances, to encourage them. And most of those women, when I ask them the question, but who knows how much the kids' clothes cost and what their activities are and who plans the vacation? Oh, well, I do. So they don't distinguish between family finances, budgeting, and understanding lifestyle versus investments. And frankly, when we're starting to talk about separation and divorce, it's really understanding family finances more so than the investment side of things. So I hope in the discussions, those early discussions that I have with those female clients, giving them a sense of comfort and confidence to be able to say, you know, a little bit more than you think you do. Yeah, it's a learning curve there. And again, how do we find that balance? So in those situations, you know, again, that crossover of gray divorce, the younger stage where it may be the stay-at-home mom, kids are not quite launched, right? Teenagers, maybe one at university, one, you know, almost finishing high school. So there's still concerns about children and concerns, as an example, to keep the family home. Having discussions about what that really means financially, what it really means, how do we find a balance there to say you might give up one thing in order to hold on to a place. And again, the forecasting that I do can indicate you can't afford to keep the home forever, but that's not your intent anyways. So can we find a way of keeping the home until the kids are launched? So that's very different. So again, once we start digging a little bit deeper and doing you know, a bit of analyzing, at the end of the day, we hope we can get to some kind of a settlement and some kind of agreement. So not necessarily 50-50, but you know, can we get to something that you know, achieves everybody's goals?
And I know just from my own background that a lot of the work that you do that can be so helpful is you can explain to your clients how, even though on paper something is, let's say, 50,000, and this is also 50,000, but the different tax implications of different types of settlements. So for our viewers, I'm just making it easy. In Ontario, we can have one matrimonial home, which has a very different tax. What word am I looking for? No capital gains on the matrimonial home. But let's say some families have a cottage and they have a condo and whatever, a chalet. Those properties do have tax implications and settlements. So I imagine a lot of the work that you do is taking different sorts of ideas and settlements, but explaining the consequences. of the
Sure,
decision.
you know, and if they're working with lawyers, lawyers do a lot of that explanation too. And I think what happens is people need to hear these things sometimes a second or third time. I think around the table where you've got two lawyers and a couple, and some of this information is covered off, and everybody around the table is nodding their head and saying, yeah, I get it, I get it, I get it. After a while, it's a bit too embarrassing to say that I don't get it. So you kind of sort of nod your head. And then they come to me and say, I really didn't get it. And so sometimes it may just be that they need that second explanation or third, and they're ready to hear it. And in some instances, you know, I may be explaining it in a slightly different language than their lawyer might be explaining it to them. And then again, where the penny drops and it's finally, oh, okay, so I know what that means, right? So yeah, I think that's the value of having, you know, a team or a bit of a team working with you, because you need to hear things from different perspectives, even though we're talking about the same thing. So that's a huge value added when somebody is working with me, or certainly when they're working with a family mediator, and let's say talking about children's issues or parenting, and you know, the concept may be, well, we want the 50-50 because that's going to affect child support, versus what's the reality of actually creating that 50-50 schedule, right? It's the same thing, but it's different.
I get it. So yeah, because when people want the 50-50 parenting time schedule, sometimes I'll say, so let's talk about what a typical day looks like. You know, and I may just say, does your child like getting up at 5 a.m. for school because the parents live far apart? Well, I didn't think of that. So it's the same idea along that line. So how did you get into this work? Because I saw on your website, you've been married a long time, no divorce.
Amazing, right? I qualify as that impossible great divorce, so keeps my husband on his toes, let me tell you. Now I had a traditional.
My father said that about my mother. He couldn't divorce her. She owned everything.
Yeah, well, so same kind of thing. I've got the power. I had a traditional financial planning practice, and certainly a lot of new clients that I was getting were coming to me, either they were in the midst of divorce or after divorce. And recognizing, because I hadn't gone through it myself, I really had very little knowledge of what that was all about. So that's what got me going down the road of looking at the CDFA qualifications. So I did that, but my intent originally was only to have that as basic background. But the more I got involved in the course and understanding the value that it can bring to clients, realized that it made sense perhaps to create a practice specializing in that. And so I did that over 15 years ago, and have been doing.
You were a trailblazer.
And well, I've been doing this work exclusively
Really, like
the last 12 years. Yeah, I mean, the CDFA at that point was relatively new, so it was, you know, it wasn't as popular certainly as it is now. So I think one of the first in Canada that certainly had that certification, and then everything grew on top of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because I've seen you also in a lot of interviews, and you're known as an expert in your field, but really a trailblazer.
Well, I mean, if I look back now, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients at all stages and phases of separation and divorce. So, you know, I've seen a lot.
Where can people find your book?
The book is, there's the book they can find through me, so through my website. So there's a link to the book. It's on Amazon, so they can find it there as well.
Excellent. And love it. I'm going to get a copy for myself.
I would give equal, oh, you can't see the light here, but so the back of the book says, because we have when Harry left Sally, but the back of the book says, or when Sally left Harry. So we want to give.
Oh, that's awesome. So,
and we couldn't all fit that on the same page.
No discrimination between the genders.
No, no. And it's a book really we've written for people that are contemplating this. It's not a legal book per se, but it's a book for somebody that's sort of struggling with this idea and saying, am I thinking about this? And so there's a lot of stories based on clients that came to us that were at this phase, and what we learned from them and what their main concerns were, and understanding from that gray divorce has to be done differently because it is different.
I'm going to read it for sure. For people that want to reach out to you, that want to access your services, what's the best way?
The best way to reach out to me is through my website. So it's evasachs.com.
And can you spell it for them?
EVASACHS.com.
Perfect. Just because people
just
make
Google Eva
mistakes.
Sachs and you'll find me.
Eva. So just so people know. Well, it was a pleasure having you, and you're a wealth of information for the listeners. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Me too. And thank you for waking up early for me on a Sunday.
No worries. Now we can all go outside and enjoy the gorgeous day.
For sure. Thank you for joining me on the Dish on Divorce. I'm Jennifer Barkin.